You know, I was on one of my holidays overseas and walking through one of those forests, and I looked around me, and for a moment I was stunned. I looked up and I saw that the trees were huge. They were tall. They were so impressive. And that struck me, that amazed me. I'm not sure if you had that sort of experience before, but trees can grow up to a very, very high height. The tallest trees can grow up to 3 times the size of a 10-story building. And one of the questions which biologists ask is, how do trees transport water? I mean, the soil where the water is found is right at the bottom. So how do they transport water from there to the tallest leaf in the tree? Well, that's a question we'll be exploring in the next part of our topic on transport systems. And here's a plant, and you probably know the big picture already from your primary school. So you know that water, as well as mineral salts, are absorbed through the roots from the soil. And then from the roots, they are transported up into the stem, right, through the xylem tissue, which we learned about. And then from that point, from the stem, they are transported to the leaves. So this is the big picture. And for this video, we'll be starting just at this point, looking at how water and mineral salts are absorbed by the roots. So the learning objectives of this video, and by the end of it, you need to know how to answer the question, how do roots absorb water and mineral salts? And from there, it is also an example of diffusion and osmosis in plants. So I need you to think back on last year and to think back on the time where this cell looked familiar to you. Well, it's been a while since you studied cells, but this cell should be familiar to you. What is this cell? Very special cell that's found in plants. It is a root hair cell found in the roots of plants. And what is it specialized for? What's its function? Well, root hair cell, hopefully you can remember, is to absorb water and mineral salts. Right, and it's a typical cell. It's got lots of the usual typical cell parts. So it's got a long, narrow protrusion called the root hair. Right, it's got its own cell wall, cell membrane, nucleus, and cytoplasm, as well as the vacuole over here. So this is a root hair cell, and it specializes in absorbing water and mineral salts. It's going to be the star of the show in this video. We're going to see more of what it does in just a bit. Okay, so as I mentioned, we'll be looking at the big picture, starting with the absorption of water and mineral salts in the roots. So let's dive deeper into that now. So how is water absorbed in the roots? Well, before we go there, we need to look a bit closer at the root hair cell. So here is my root hair cell. And you can see that it comes into contact with the soil. And importantly, soil particles are surrounded by a thin film of moisture called the soil solution. Right, the soil solution is mostly water, and it also has dissolved mineral salts and other substances inside. And the root hair cells, in particular the root hair of the root hair cells, come into contact with the soil solution. So how is water absorbed into the roots? Well, the starting point is that the cell sap of the root hair cell usually has a very high concentration of dissolved mineral salts, right? Because cells need those mineral salts to survive, right? So the cell sap, which is the fluid inside the vacuole of the root hair cell. So here's the cell sap's inside the root hair cell, inside the vacuole. Right, the cell sap of the root hair cell usually has a high concentration of dissolved mineral salts. So a lot of dissolved substances. So the question you should be thinking at this point is the water potential of the cell sap high or low compared to the soil solution outside? So this is the soil solution. And the answer is that the water potential of the root hair cell is relatively low, right? Because it's very concentrated in mineral salts. So a lot of mineral salts dissolve, so less water particles, so low water potential, right? Compared to the soil solution. Alright, so the water potential of the soil solution is higher than the water potential of the cell sap inside the root hair cell. Okay, so if I draw it out, these red dots representing water particles. Okay, there are more water particles outside in the soil solution compared to inside the cell sap. So the water potential of the soil solution is higher than the water potential of the cell sap. Right, this is because the cell sap has a very high concentration of mineral salts. So what happens? So what happens now? Well, from what you've learned about osmosis, you should be able to say that water molecules now move into the root hair cell by osmosis. Right, from a region of higher water potential to a region of lower water potential. So water will move into the root hair cells by osmosis. Now after water moves into the root hair cell by osmosis, okay, it needs to move into the xylem of the root. Okay, so from the root hair cell, there are more inner cells before the xylem. Alright, so there's some inner root cells before the xylem. So water molecules move from the root hair cell from one cell to the next by osmosis until they reach the xylem. Okay, so water molecules move from the soil solution into the root hair cell, then from the root hair cell from one cell to the next until it reaches the xylem. And all the way this process is osmosis. Right, and then when it reaches the xylem, okay, water is transported up the xylem to the stem and then to the leaves. Okay, so this is how water is absorbed into the root. Now how about mineral salts? So we've learned about how water moves into root hair cells by osmosis. How about mineral salts? Now some mineral salts are very high in concentration in the soil compared to the root hair cell. So for example, there might be a mineral salt called mineral salt sodium. Okay, maybe sodium is very high in the soil compared to inside the root hair cell. So how does the root hair cell absorb such mineral salts? High concentration outside, lower concentration inside. I hope that the answer ringing in your mind should be by diffusion. Alright. Okay, so when there's a higher concentration of mineral salts in the soil solution and a lower concentration of mineral salts in the root hair cell, then the mineral salts are absorbed into the root hair cell by diffusion. So the mineral salts will move by diffusion into the root hair cells, and then they will move again by diffusion, okay, from one cell to the next until they reach the xylem, and then from the xylem it will be transported up to the leaves. So take note that for mineral salts, they move by diffusion. They do not move by osmosis. Alright? Osmosis is only for water molecules. For mineral salts, they move by diffusion. Now as an extension, however, some mineral salts are very low in concentration in the soil compared to inside the root hair cell. So sometimes the root hair cell contains certain mineral salts, let's say in this case might be calcium, right, in a very, very high concentration inside the cell compared to outside the cell. The question is, can the root hair cell use diffusion to absorb this? And the answer, hopefully, that you realize is that no, these cannot be absorbed by diffusion, right? Because how will these mineral salts want to move, right? Normally, they will try to move from a region of higher concentration to a region of lower concentration. So naturally, they will try to move out of the cell, right? So I cannot move it into the cell by diffusion. From lower concentration to higher concentration, I cannot absorb it by diffusion. So these root hair cells actually now need a different process, right, called active transport, which uses energy to move mineral salts from a region of lower concentration to a region of higher concentration by active transport. Right, this is not really in your syllabus, but go find out more about this active transport. It's kind of like the opposite of diffusion. So it moves substances from lower to higher concentration using energy. Okay, so let's just end off with you doing a quick check in your notes. I want you to look at the quick check and just circle the words which are correct for this description of how water is absorbed into root hair cells. Alright, so end off with this and we'll go through it in class. Okay, pause the video and try it, and I'll see you back in class, and hopefully you can ask questions if you need to clarify.